Part 86. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 863. Once, when he was forcibly detained here by Su Fugui for the first time, Subai felt so miserable about this kind of imprisonment life that he even gave up on himself and walked into hell. However, he later entered here again and took over from Su. When Fugui became the guardian of the eastern place of enlightenment, Subai didn't actually have much resistance in his heart. Instead, he had a sense of relief similar to escape from success. After all, before today, the place of enlightenment was indeed the closest place to the broadcast, and it was also the safest place, of course. But until today, the facts gave Subai a big slap in the face. He thought he could rely on he used the intimidation of radio to prevent the influence and oppression of that man and woman on him, but who knew that radio was actually working with that man and woman? The reason why Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiu dared to plan and prepare so decisively and even waited for 20 years for this was not because of how tenacious their minds were, nor because they were really much higher than the audience of the same generation. It's not because they are those children of destiny, nor is it because the young master named Zhao developed a toxin that can poison the radio. But because, as a broadcaster, the will has joined forces with them. It is equivalent to the emperor of a country saying to you, "Come on, you can become a rebel, and I will help you." Faced with such a promise and such a pie, who can really refuse? It was precisely because of this guarantee and this reason that Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiu were determined to embark on this path. To this end, his own heirs are experimental tools and poisons. My own sisters and my own parents are insignificant discards. The relationships, friends, and companions I once had all became victims of my own plans. The road is long and lonely, but with the commitment and cooperation of broadcasters, there will always be a clear dawn on this road. Subai remembered that Lizzie once asked Hai Mei to follow him to Qinhuangdao to find where Su Yuhang and the others were hiding, because Lizzie was also looking for a way to avoid the broadcaster's gaze. But now, it really seems ridiculous. Because the reason why Su Yuhang and his wife were able to achieve the step that ordinary people could not do, and to avoid the broadcaster's gaze, was because the broadcaster deliberately did not look towards where they were. It's not that they were hidden cleverly, but that the broadcast deliberately ignored them. This is a completely different concept, which means that the difficulty of the game has changed directly from extremely difficult to novice. This is an unfair game. Once upon a time, Subai had imagined that his cheap parents would keep walking on this road, and then he saw that the road ahead was blocked, and there would be an ironic smiling face painted on the rock. Now, it is obviously impossible. However, Subai is still not sure what the ultimate goal of the man and the woman is, nor is he sure of the broadcasting consciousness, and what is the reason why he did this. It's just that he can't take the initiative to find these answers now, but the answers will eventually come. Appeared. That's when the next story world mission comes. You should be able to see the answer you want. When Subai walked out of the white light, hills did not appear beside him. The guy should have been sent directly back to the west. The blue sky, the amber Erhai Lake, the majestic Kangshan Mountain, this scene makes people feel relaxed and happy, but in Subai's eyes at the moment, it seems a bit like chewing wax. No matter how beautiful the scenery is, it will be meaningless once you lose the state of mind to appreciate it. But the next moment, Subai immediately sensed three familiar auras, and those three people didn't seem to notice him yet. Subai waited for a while, made sure, and found that the three people had indeed not noticed him, which made Subai couldn't help but smile. There have been too many things going on recently, so much that Subai is a little numb and has no time to care. First of all, when he first became a guardian, Subai and Hills were communicating with each other across the bronze mirror. Then Subai went to study some tombstones, and then had another duel for glory and tradition with Hills. Then there was the woman who stole the tombstone, and in the middle there was the story world that erased Su Yuhang's existence in his memory, and so on. It's like a person's experience is slowly accumulated by the big events and waves he has experienced. Sudbai's recent experience has had a great impact on the body, the soul, and the state of mind. And it was a series of impacts, and I even just suddenly discovered that my strength was already at the peak of the advanced listener's junior level. It can even be said that half of my feet have stepped into the intermediate level of advanced listener. You know, it really didn't take long for him to advance to become an advanced listener and become a guardian. This speed of progress was already terrifying enough. It is precisely because of the improvement in strength that the distance between the two sides is actually quite close. However, Sudbai can clearly sense the monk, Buddha, and Fatty, but those three cannot sense him. This is a concrete manifestation of the strength gap. Lord Buddha, Fatty, have all advanced. Although the four people in the past had their ups and downs, it seemed that no one was completely left behind by the others. Although Hills was not around, there were still two guys at Sudbai's feet, Jixiang and Ruyi. Jixiang seemed quite normal. After all, he had been out for more than 10 years and was very familiar with the outside world. However, Ruyi did not show the hesitation and nervousness he felt when he left home for the first time. Instead, he only felt a sense of sadness and nervousness. Remember, many things, can no longer go back, such as its home. He reached out and held both black cats in his arms. Both black cats showed disgust at the same time and were ready to resist. In terms of pride, these two black cats were similar. Neither of them wanted to become humans. The pet in his hand, even during the period when Ji Xiang lost his memory, would subconsciously resent and resist every time Sudbai touched it. This was something that was infiltrated into his bones. "Go find, son," Sudbai said. The next moment, Ji Xiang, who was still struggling, suddenly stopped struggling. A look of anger and fear appeared in his cat eyes. The person he relied on and accompanied him also beat him to pieces. The culprit. The real pain is betrayal. This applies very aptly to Ji Xiang. Sudbai remembered the scene when it screamed like blood beside the underworld. In fact, for Sudbai, no matter what steps Su Yuhang and his wife will take, or what changes will happen to the upper management of the broadcast, it no longer seems to have a direct relationship with him. A chess piece that has already played its role. Now, he just wants to do what he wants to do. The first thing is to find the little guy. The second thing is, no matter what form his cheap parents take in the end, as long as they still exist, one day he will go up and completely annihilate them. After seeing Ji Xiang's change, Ruyi stopped struggling and let Sudbai hold him in his arms. Sudbai took out his mobile phone. The battery was out of power, but when you wanted to open the WeChat official account interface, the screen of your mobile phone automatically turned on. There was no need to input anything or choose anything. Sudbai just stood there and said, "Use my reward authority to ask about the location of my child Su Yuxuan." However, a public account preview message like this was sent on the WeChat screen of the mobile phone. The cover is a picture of 404, and the content is very concise. Broadcasting is entering and exiting the closed maintenance state, and some services have been suspended. Taking a deep breath, Sudbai's mood dropped a lot now. When the broadcast is at its most chaotic, if he can successfully learn the location of the little guy through the reward authority he just obtained, then whether he goes to rescue himself or to take revenge, it is actually easier to operate. In troubled times, people's lives are worse than dogs, and it is also the easiest time to fish in troubled waters. However, due to the current closed maintenance of the broadcast, I have no way to get the news I want. Once the order and operation of the broadcast are restored, I want to take action and do things, which will hinder, and the bond will undoubtedly be much greater. After all, with Sudbai's temper and character, someone stole your son. Not going to take revenge? How can it be? Sudbai's figure disappeared on the spot, and then appeared on the opposite side of High Lake. Then, he disappeared again and appeared on the rooftop of the inn opposite. Around people. Before, Subai didn't plan to come to these three brothers first, because Subai didn't want them to be dragged into his affairs. He would definitely take revenge on Haimai and the people around Haimai, so there was no need to drag them out. Fatty and the others went into the water together, because Subai knew that once they knew what he was going to do, they would definitely follow him and be willing to share the cause and effect that could have been borne by him alone. This was not because of the relationship between Subai and them, but because during the years when the four of them lived under the same roof, each of them had fed the little guy and held the little guy on their knees and played with them. The fat man had just picked up the teacup and took a sip of water. When he saw Subai suddenly appearing in front of him, he spurted the tea out of his mouth. Subai turned slightly so that the tea did not splash on him. Dabai, you, the fat man was so surprised that he was speechless. Buddha and the monk had smiles on their faces. The monk clasped his hands together and recited Amitabha, while the Buddha exerted his fingers slightly, showing his excitement. Not too much politeness, not too much nagging. Subai said directly. Help me check where Jamie May is. I'm back. You can kill people. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 864. The free shipping area in Jiangsu, Zhejiang, and Shanghai has recently turned into a big furnace. The long-term high-temperature weather that has been rare in decades is shrouding this land. The so-called free shipping area has turned into a warm area at this time. This feeling became even more clear and obvious when I walked out of the airport building. Hey, I feel like I don't have Shanghai fever in Dolly, the fat man complained helplessly. For fat people, the heat is obviously more disgusting than the cold. Of course, with Fatty's current strength and life level, these heats really don't have a great impact on him. It's just that everyone is used to taking the role of ordinary people in the real world, so ordinary people they also have the temperature difference experience. On the plane before, the four of them were all sitting in first class. Subai told them everything he knew and guessed about the situation. This was information sharing that Subai had not done with Hills. But with these three people, there is really no need to hide anything. However, no matter how much speculation and calculation is done, the final result still depends on what the next story world will be like. The airport is not far from Lao Fang's home. The four of them returned to Lao Fang's home first, and then Fatty, the monk, and Buddha began to use their network to find the whereabouts of Haimai. The story world is still completely closed now, and all the listeners who entered the story world before have been forcibly pushed out. In other words, Jamie May is definitely in the real world now. Jixiang was crawling on the carpet in the living room, and Ruyi was crawling next to him. Neither cat was in a very high mood, while Subai was sitting on the sofa. He didn't have much of a network, and he seemed to only know a forum administrator. It's somewhat useful, but the fat man probably knows him, so there's no need to do it himself. Watching other people calling one after another, Subai silently made a pot of tea on the coffee table. His tea art skills were naturally not as good as those of a monk, but his level was more than that of an amateur. But here in such a state of mind, tea obviously cannot have any soothing effect. Putting down the teacup, he leaned back on the sofa and subconsciously rubbed his temples with his hands. My own memory also began to return to the story world of that one-day prisoner's story. In that one-day prisoner's story world, there were not many characters in total, including myself, Buddha, the monk, the fat man, Jamie May, old man Shen. Wrong. There seems to be another one, Xie. Subai remembered that in that story world, the monk gave a suggestion of a method of elimination, and finally brought Xie with him. Only then did he eliminate all other possibilities and confirm the fact that Li Ji was not the real deity, and finally found Haimai. Although the story world is a story world, in that story world Monk Fatty and the others all appear in the form of clones, and their memories cannot be shared because they are just two people, but inexplicably, Subai suddenly thought of understanding. Because Lord Buddha had said before when chatting with him on the plane that he didn't know why he chose to use that kind of enlightenment method to get promoted, but Subai clearly remembered that in the story world of One Day Prisoner, he had already been promoted. As a senior listener, I gave such advice to Buddha. Subai is not very clear whether the story world and the real world can produce corresponding levels of radiation under specific conditions, but if the story world is compared to a dream, even an ordinary person may have a dream. I will go to a dream interpreter for analysis. So in the story world of One Day in Prison, if the interpreter appears, will he also be affected in the real world like Buddha? Besides, for a living person like Haimai, it's not like he likes to be a loner and doesn't like to socialize, and it's not like Haimai has even appeared in the recent period after the monk and the three of them launched their own network. No place has been explored. Because for a long time, Haimai has been Lychee walking in the real world. He needs to have his own network to operate, and he also needs to be Lychee's spokesperson to make arrangements in the real world. Therefore, there is no news about Haimai's appearance in the recent period, which can only indicate two possibilities. One way, he is in retreat. In the second case, he is in seclusion. Taking out his charged mobile phone, Subai found Zijhen on WeChat, and then sent a voice call request. Not long after, the call was connected. This world seems to have really changed. You actually came out from there. Xie tone was a little surprised, because Subai was able to use his own number to contact him at this time, which in itself showed that Subai, we are free now. In a ghost place like the Land of Enlightenment, communication with the outside world is basically cut off. Hi Mai, are you here? Subai went straight to the point. In the past, he was not very particular about doing things and speaking in vain. Now, he seems to be more disgusted with the feeling of wasting time doing meaningless things. Perhaps, it was the 6 months of complete isolation in the place of enlightenment that pushed his character further into the abyss of isolation. This feeling was also felt by the fat man, the monk, and the Buddha who reunited with Subai, but they did not take it to heart. After all, everyone understood each other. In the past, Subai could occasionally show his warm side when the little guy was around. Now the little guy doesn't know whether he is alive or dead, and he has experienced so many things recently. If he can continue to do things flawlessly in dealing with others, then he is really not Subai. How did you know? Xie Zhen's words were a disguised admission. I'm here to find you, Subai said. Are you already in Shanghai? Xie Zhen estimated the time in his mind. The changes in the place of enlightenment should have occurred after the broadcast problems occurred. In other words, Subai returned to Shanghai directly after coming out of the place of enlightenment. Without delaying for a moment, you can come, but I guess it will be difficult for you to take the person away. Xie Zhen turned around and looked at the middle-aged man with a trump mouth who was sitting face to face with his boss Liang Sen by the swimming pool behind him. Being able to sit on an equal footing with his boss in this place speaks volumes about his status. I'm sorry, this is non-negotiable. Subai's response was still very cold. This coldness made Xie Zhen feel a little uncomfortable, so he hung up the phone directly. This guy's character is really becoming more and more annoying. Liang Sen's eyes turned around at this moment and looked at Xie Zhen. Ji Zhen smiled and said, the layout of the place of enlightenment has changed, and the guardians have all been laid off. Hearing this, Liang Sen nodded. He had known for a long time that Xie Zhen had brought Haimai back to the villa and used the villa's formation to suppress Haimai, who was just an ordinary veteran. In addition, in recent times, Haimai there was no mission in the story world, so he couldn't escape from here at all. But now, the broadcast changed, and the little detective named Su whom he had met several times was planning to come to his door. Until now, Liang Sen didn't really understand why Xie Zhen deliberately helped Subai to hold Haimai captive in advance. However, Xie Zhen was not purely his subordinate, so he just turned a blind eye. But now that Lychee is back and has sent this big boss named Luda from Sichuan to ask for people, he really has no reason not to give them. Luda was drinking red wine. When he heard this, he didn't know the complicated relationship between Subai and Haimai. Just like the character Master Zhao, there are absolutely very few people who really know his true identity. Some secrets will only be spread within an extremely narrow circle. The Guardian has been laid off. Luda Miller narrowed his eyes. The old rich man is coming out. The news of Su Fugui's death did not spread. Only the local big shot audience witnessed Su Fugui digging up his wife's grave and then annihilating it with his wife's ashes. As for the others, unless they are people who have really come into contact with Subai, they have no idea about the place of enlightenment in the East. In fact, the Guardian has been changed long ago. Haha, it's not Su Fugui, it's a young man, Liang Sen replied. The place of enlightenment just changed its Guardian half a year ago, and Su Fugui has already left there. You, old rich man, should also be on the train this time. Luda was only concerned about this matter. Lychee returned on the train, which means that the train is about to leave from here again, probably during this time. The tickets will be sent to them, but recently there may be a problem with the broadcast, so this kind of thing will naturally be delayed. Although during this incident, most of the big-name audience members acted like goose-headed geese and only did one thing, looking at the sky. But everyone actually knows in their hearts that if the situation and form continues, broadcasting will still be broadcasting, and the current chaos is only temporary, just like ordinary people in ancient times watching court struggles. The emperor will change, but everyone's life, how to live is actually the same way, but the notices posted on the city wall at that time may be a little more complicated and confusing. Probably so, Liang Sen guessed. However, if I guess the meaning of the call just now is correct, the former guardian of the Eastern Enlightenment land should have the same purpose as you. He also wants to come to Haimai, Luda said in surprise. Well, he not only wants to find him, he wants to kill him. Liang Sen smiled slightly. He had personal experience with the character of the small town man who was his neighbor. He Luda suddenly laughed. Then, Liang Sen on the side also laughed. Two big shot audience members are sitting here drinking, but no one else can be so arrogant. You are destined to leave by train soon, and he will continue to stay. When you leave, if he wants to kill Haimai, can you stop him? Xie Zhen thought in his heart, but he didn't think people like Subai would be really sane enough to wait for a while to let these big guys leave this world before taking action. It's really hard for you to understand the thinking of a mental patient. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 865. There were 4 people sitting in the living room, and 2 cats were crawling on the carpet. The monk held the beads in his hand, one after another, but it was not chanting the Buddha's name. It was more like a boring continuous movement. This kind of situation rarely happened to the monk. He acted very calm at all times. Just now, the monk said that he was going to advance. Buddha didn't say anything, and neither did the fat man, but Subai stopped him. A few days ago, I faced some Indian bodhisattvas who suddenly crossed the line at Urhai Lake. The monk became a burden to Fatty and Buddha, so he chose to advance. As a result, Zhao Bayanan appeared. As one of the big guys guarding the southwest, Zhao Bayanan he repelled the bodhisattvas who crossed the line and stopped the monk from advancing because he could see that the reason why the other party crossed the line to capture the monk was because he saw the opportunity for the monk to advance perfectly, so he planned to snatch this luck over there. Create a boss-level audience of your own. But this time, the monk chose to advance because Subai had just mentioned the location of Haimai and the situation there. Everyone wants to find Haimai and take revenge, but what they have to face is a boss-level audience. Looking at the relationship between Li Ji and Liang Sen, they may have to face more than one boss-level audience. Audience. This is not like using a mantis as a chariot or hitting a rock with an egg. This is exactly like the Polish cavalry ramming into a German tank convoy, similar to the Senglinkan cavalry in the late Qing dynasty rushing towards the artillery formation of the British and French Allied forces. The outcome is actually very clear. Unless there is a big miracle, there is basically no chance of success if you take the initiative to ask for someone this time. But Fatty decided to go because he was the closest to the little guy among the four of them except Subai. He was almost the little guy's godfather. On weekdays, whether Subai was around or not, Fatty liked to hold the little guy. The guy let the little guy crawl on his belly to play with him. Fat master, I may not have any children in this life, and I don't dare to carry on the family line. Xiaoxian is Fat Master's godson. Fat Master was so kind to him in the past because he thought that if he died one day in the future, Fat Master's spiritual place would still be alive. Someone who can be with Dabai will burn some paper money during the holidays. Fatty will definitely participate in this matter. This is what the fat man said just now. Buddha seemed relatively calm, but he also made his own attitude directly. On the one hand, it was because of the little guy, on the other hand, it was because of Sudbai, and on the other hand, it was because of Sudbai's narration with everyone on the plane. Even though Sudbai didn't focus on this point, Buddha still felt that the reason why he was able to find this advanced method should be related to the story world that Sudbai experienced. Buddhism emphasizes karma and retribution. Buddha feels that since he has taken the cause, he must also be responsible for the effect. Moreover, there is another very important reason for the Buddha and the monk, that is, the lamas set up a trap and almost strangled the three of them in the suburbs of Shanghai. In the end, Sudbai tried his best to escape with the two of them. God, and at the moment when the little guy was taken away, Buddha and the monk were at home. Just in the living room. Just next door. The father was not here, and the two of them were equivalent to the child's godfathers, yet the child was kidnapped like this. Where is the face? However, Sudbai stopped the monk's plan to advance, and he was very serious, because Sudbai gave a reason. No need. These three words made the other three people present slightly shocked. Could it be that Sudbai had any other tricks up his sleeve? But no matter how many back UPS and plans there is little hope of getting anyone there when there are two big shot audience members. Because this gap in strength cannot be smoothed out so easily. Even now, in the living room, there are 5 senior listeners with the same combat power level, Dabai, Buddha, Fatty, Jixiang and Ruyi, and a monk who can advance at any time. But even if there are 6 senior listeners, facing a name or even 2 big shot listeners. Didn't you see that the 5 bodhisattvas who crossed the line were instantly crushed by Zhao Bayanan? This is a big gap, this is a huge gap. Unless Sudbai can invite a big name audience to sit in, it will be impossible. But who can Sudbai invite? Others don't know, but the fat man, the monk, and Lord Buddha are aware of Sudbai's usual style of dealing with people. Is it possible to let him hug the big name audience in advance and let him save favors? It would be better if he didn't offend everyone, and the other Liang Sen, who could have stood aside, was ridiculed by Sudbai in front of him. The most important thing is, even if you have favors, how big of favors do you have to have for a big shot audience to stand up for you against another being of the same level? It's just that Sudbai this time is indeed a little too unusual, which makes the 3 of them a little hesitant, because according to Sudbai's previous habit, it doesn't matter whether he can fight or not, but this time, Sudbai is wait. He's actually waiting? Buzz. The defensive formation in the room suddenly trembled at this moment. The monk and the fat man stood up at the same time. The formation in this room was arranged and modified by the 2 of them, so they could clearly feel that there was a powerful being outside that caused the formation to react. Did someone knock on your door? Haha, The person you were waiting for is here. Subai stood up, opened the magic circle and let her in. In fact, there was one thing that Subai didn't say, that is, this magic circle couldn't stop that person. After all, that person was the one with the strongest knowledge of the magic circle that Subai had ever seen. The monk pinched his fingers, and a hole opened in the magic circle. A woman pushed open the iron door and walked in. At this time, Subai also walked out from the floor-to-ceiling window of the living room. It seems that you are waiting for me. The woman looked at Subai with a smile on her face. She seemed to have this expression all the time. Besides being calm, she was still calm. Even though she was forced out of the place of enlightenment, she still looked very calm. The monk and others also came out. When they saw this woman, the monk and the fat man finally understood why Subai asked them to open the magic circle. Because this woman could even open the magic circle in the place of enlightenment. The old Fang family, how could it be possible to stop her with such a formation? After all, when the four of them joined forces to kill Lao Fang was just a high-level listener. Do you know what I came for? Chen Ryu asked. At the same time, she frowned slightly because Subai's attitude and calmness when she came in made her instinctively feel uncomfortable. The other party guessed that she would come, and the other party was waiting for her, which meant that she had entered the other party's rhythm. Next, she was being used. I have gained insights into the 3 tombstones you selected later. I cannot completely reshape the tombstones 100%, but relying on my insights, I can recreate 30% of them to show you, Subai said. This is a standard price negotiation gesture. It's not enough, Chen Ryu said. She knew that Subai couldn't give her what she wanted so obediently. The other party was so proactive. It was obvious that he had something to ask for later. Since it was a transaction, she had to give it to herself first. Strive for the maximum benefit, and then on the basis of satisfying yourself, consider the other party's requirements to evaluate whether you agree to make this deal. I have also learned about many other tombstones before, and I will try my best to reproduce them all for you, Subai continued. Okay, now let's talk about your conditions. Chen Ryu was still very calm. I want to kill someone. That person is in Shanghai now, but beside that person, there are 2 big shot listeners. One of them will definitely stop him, and the other has an ambiguous attitude, but will not stand on my side, Subai said. Do you want me to be your thug? Chen Ryu's eyes gleamed, and a majestic pressure came down immediately. A high-level listener actually wants to drive himself to become a thug. You will not be involved in cause and effect, because the person I want to kill stole my son first. It is only natural that I take revenge on him. Since someone is willing to protect him, you can help me and we can even out the situation, Subai continued. Road. Is there a place where 2 boss-level listeners are sitting? I can sense that place. They haven't left or moved. Chen Ryu looked at Subai. They should be waiting for you to overestimate your capabilities. Deliver it to your doorstep. With the dignity of a boss-level audience, they certainly could not be scared away by Subai. In fact, Subai, Fatty, Shangfoi and others also knew this. Unless they and others corrected their posture and chose to wait and suppress themselves, otherwise, the other party would not be able to leave so quickly. Even though the big boss can take Hai Mei and leave Shanghai now, even if Liang Sen won't stop him, he is still waiting for Subai to come to the door, waiting for Subai to stand in front of him and ask for someone. This is actually the reason why Subai called Xie Zhen with such an attitude, and Xie Zhen also understood and told Liang Sen and Lu De what Subai meant. There is another reason, I believe you will agree. Subai looked at Chen Ryu with a smile, not intimidated by Chen Ryu's momentum at all. After all, he had fought with Chen Ryu before, and that time, Chen Ryu retreated. Timid. Explain. The train is back, right? Subai asked. Right. Now that the train is back, It won't be too far away. I believe that the train will start once the broadcasting has solved its own problems and returned to normal. Now, if you help me, you will get an opportunity to interact with a big-name audience in a grand manner without being affected by cause and effect. Once these big-name audience members get on the train and leave, you will no longer have this opportunity. Compete with boss-level audiences to gain the opportunity to advance in combat insights. Since you can go to the place of enlightenment and steal tombstones without authorization in order to advance. This time, do you dare to go with me? Subai didn't know Chen Ryu's specific strength, but Subai had fought against Chen Ryu, and he could feel that although Chen Ryu was not a big-shot listener, this woman's true combat power had really surpassed that of even a high-level listener. The audience is at its peak. Chen Ryu turned around, neither agreeing nor rejecting, but said slightly strangely. You've changed. You actually know how to talk about strategy. I'll find help. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 866. Subai was unmoved by this evaluation. He knew that he could sometimes be impulsive, even hysterical, and reckless. Just as he was just an ordinary person who would set up a killing club to kill people, so was Subai at that time. I can't control this murderous impulse in my heart. But taking a closer look, when Subai was still an ordinary person, every time Subai went to kill someone, Sunur, Chu Zhao and others were responsible for the planning and arrangement beforehand and the subsequent cleanup work. In addition to his own identity and because of his status, as long as there were no major mistakes, there would be no suspicion on him that would lead to him getting burned. He was not a terrorist holding a machete or driving a big truck directly into the downtown area and rampaging. After learning about his life experience, Subai knew that his existence was actually the layout and plan of the couple, but Subai did not choose to commit suicide and ended himself by committing suicide to let his cheap father. Mom's efforts to fetch water were all in vain. There is a big difference between impulsiveness and stupidity. Chen Ryu's statement was regarded as her acquiescence to the deal. She pursued her from Erhai Lake to Shanghai just to obtain some tombstone inheritance from Subai. She had been stuck at the peak level of senior audience for a long time and urgently needed some opportunities and opportunities. Stimulation allows one to advance, and the second condition given by Subai is actually more critical than the first. Being able to fight against a big-shot audience without karma is of great significance to Chen Ryu now. It is definitely much greater than getting some incomplete tombstone inheritance from Subai. The two of them, it can be said that everyone gets what he needs. Go now, Chen Ryu asked, because she didn't see Subai's intention to leave now. You must know that the reason why the other party's boss stayed there without leaving with the target was to wait for Subai. If Subai lingers for a long time, the other party will think that Subai is a coward. In this case, there is no need for him to continue waiting and he can leave with Haimai. Subai didn't answer, but at this moment his cell phone rang, then he took it out, looked at it, and said with a smile, "Let's go." The fat man drove his Audi car in, Chen Ryu sat in the passenger seat, and Subai, the monk, and Buddha sat in the back. Originally, everyone didn't need to take the car, but the fat man said, "Since we are looking for a place, you can't just walk over and let people laugh." Subai didn't remind Fatty that when you drove this car in the past, it was almost a joke to people who owned big companies. Luda had already drank half of his third glass of red wine, and Liang Sen had already picked up the newspaper and read it. He, Liang Sen, had all kinds of shortcomings, and even some of his temperaments were not known among the upper-class circles. Word spread, but no one could take away the fact that he was a big-time listener. Luda is here with the mission given by Li Ji. He, Liang Sen, will hand over the person and then drink with you for a glass of wine. He is extremely benevolent and has given up his attitude and face. Now you have to stay here and deliberately stay here to wait for a junior to come and provoke you. Has Liang Sen really been waiting for you and waiting for people to come to your door? He's not coming, Luda said, and he was a little impatient to wait. In fact, Luda's heart was not very peaceful now, because of Lichi's sudden return. The train would be ready to leave in the near future, and there were still a lot of things to deal with and prepare for, but since the other party was planning to come and rob someone, he felt that given his identity and status, it would be too much of a loss if he let a high-level audience be scared away. Although the existences at their level are all thoughtful old foxes, people are still people after all, and the shadow of a person's famous tree, a person's prestige and reputation, for a big-shot audience, sometimes can be very valuable. None, but sometimes it is very important. Luda glanced at Liang Sen, who was sitting in front of him and reading the newspaper comfortably. He knew that when everyone took the train to go there, Liang Sen, who had always had a bad reputation before, was very likely to eat his previous seeds. Bitter fruit. There were no restrictions on broadcasting in that place, only the absolute opposition between the audience and the local indigenous people. What would be Liang Sen's status by then? Can he continue to maintain his current indifferent attitude in the real world? A group of hunting dogs comes out of the cage. Whoever is ruthless and domineering can make others around him fearful and can eat the most. Those who are weak can only be used as cannon fodder. Even if you are in danger, your companions may not bother to save you because they think you are dispensable. For example, if Lichi was besieged by the indigenous people in that place, a group of big-name listeners would definitely go to great lengths to rescue him. But if Liang Sen was besieged, everyone would have to weigh the price paid to save Liang Senator. Wouldn't it be too cost-effective? As a boss-level audience, it would be difficult for even someone with Li Ji's status to command him, let alone ask him to run errands directly. But at this time, Luda knew that he and Li Ji would have a good relationship. Only through relationships can we better live in that place longer. Those who are not afraid of life, those who are not afraid of death, those who are simple and brave, have long died in the time period of experiencers, low-level listeners, and ordinary listeners. Who of the people who have climbed to this position now will not escape a narrow escape? Who doesn't struggle to survive in various dangerous situations? It will come. Xie, who was standing aside like a waiter, reminded him at this time, maybe because of a feeling of sympathy, maybe because when the train leaves, the next era belongs to him. He was of the same generation as Subai, so this time Xie buttocks sat very crooked. Furthermore, he explained that when he personally captured Hai Mai Mei and trapped her under this villa in front of Chen Guang, was it just to wait for Lizzie to come back and give it to Lizzie's leader? How can it be? Xie attitude is unclear to Luda. After all, he is not on the same level as Xie. Naturally, he will not care about the relationship between Xie and Subai, nor will he analyze the mentality of who is now, but Liang Sen, who was reading the newspaper on the side, knew it very well. For some reason, ever since he met that Subai, his assistant began to unconsciously want to get closer to that person. If he hadn't been there, maybe he was planning to move to Lao Fang's house and live with those people. However, Liang Sen didn't say anything. He was the one who was about to leave after all. When his group of big bosses left by train, the world would belong to Ji Zhen's generation. It was true that Xie Zhen was his assistant. But the relationship between the two is difficult to define so clearly. Forget it, I won't wait. Luda stood up. He was about to leave. Then he looked at Liang Senator. Liang Sen nodded, meaning to let Xie Zhen release Hai Mai Mei from the villa formation. Xie Zhen understood that he had been delaying Subai for so long. If Subai really didn't plan to come but chose to hide his power and bide his time for the first time, then Xie Zhen could be regarded as the most benevolent and righteous person. However, at this moment, an Audi A6 drove straight in. Naturally, the security foyer at the gate of the villa complex could not stop this car. Luda turned around in surprise. He actually hadn't heard much about Subai. The reason why the other big guys knew about Subai was because of Su Yuhang and his wife. In other words, the bosses who know about the existence of Su Yuhang and his wife are considered to be an outstanding group in the circle of boss-level listeners. Because they want to imitate the path of Su Yuhang and his wife, they study them. Once you study them, you can find out that the couple has children in the real world. Then you can follow the clues and use the huge network of relationships built by your own status to find out from top to bottom that Subai has children. Some information and materials from the audience are not difficult at all. Luda doesn't know Subai, which can only mean that he is still a newcomer in the circle of big shot listeners, and he doesn't have much ambition. Maybe, he is just a little better than Liang Senator. Otherwise, why doesn't Lichi ask people like Zhao Bianan to help him bring Hai Mai Mei out? The Audi car stopped. Fatty got out of the car first, followed by the monk, Subai, and Buddha. Chen Ru sat in the passenger seat and did not get out. She verbally agreed to Subai's conditions, but she really didn't. You have to really put yourself in the position of the thug. The fat man put his hand in the bag and quietly pressed the phone. They told him, "Don't you ever come around here. Don't wanna see your face. You better disappear." The fire's in their eyes. And their words are really clear. So beat it, just beat it. The dynamic melody of Michael Jackson's Beat It began to flow out. The fat man shook his long bangs that he had grown out because he hadn't had a haircut for a long time. He was striding forward with a cigarette in his mouth and high spirits. Subai, the monk, and Buddha were obviously a little confused by the fat man's extravagance. The three subconsciously stopped and did not follow the fat man's rhythm and moved forward. Opposite. Ji Zhen, who was about to open the formation cage, was stunned. Liang Sen put down the newspaper. Luda's facial expression was slightly stiff, and he even twitched uncontrollably. The fat man was still immersed in his own world. He didn't realize that his three gay friends had stopped and pretended not to recognize him. He held a cigarette between his fingers, pointed at Luda and Liang Sen in front of him, and curled his lips. He spat and said, "Blinded your dog eyes, hand over the person quickly. Do you know who you are going to face? The broadcaster is his father, the announcer is his mother. The biggest prince in the audience. Terror broadcast." Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 867. Before the fat man became an audience, he was just talking about nonsense. The important thing for people who are talking about nonsense is not their professional knowledge, because most people don't understand this aspect. It can even be said that in this era, the number of people who truly believe in this thing is becoming more and more important. There are fewer and fewer people, even the old people. It is really hard to say how superstitious they are. The traditional feudal superstitious activities have now increasingly transformed into intangible culture. The most important thing in Baishire's business is to be able to deceive the host's house, deceive the relatives and friends who come to express condolences, and deceive everyone. Then you can get your salary and everyone will be happy. Once you say the wrong thing, okay, I didn't fool you. It's very common to have your legs broken. After all, someone in your family just died. Everyone is immersed in sadness, and people's emotions will be very sensitive at this time. At this time, Fatty completely showed off his old instinct of eating by himself. Radio is his father. The announcer is his mother. Even Subai, the prince in the fat man's mouth, was stunned on the spot. The monk recited Ba silently in his heart, and the Buddha subconsciously held his breath to avoid laughing. On the plane, Subai told them what happened. The meaning was very simple. Broadcasting was originally a rule, an existence similar to a program, but it did not know why it produced its own emotions. In short, it was a self-awareness appeared on top of the rules. Why this self-awareness appeared and who caused it to appear is temporarily unknown, but what can be confirmed now is that it is the self-awareness that forms the basis for broadcasting each story. The world pursues this kind of storytelling atmosphere. In fact, if you dissect the storytelling aspect of radio, you can more clearly see the essence of the story world, which is similar to cultivating poison, allowing listeners to fight, plunder, gain insights and grow. This story is just a condiment, just like a dish. If you don't add condiments, it will taste very unpleasant and difficult to swallow. But if you hold your nose and eat it, it will still be able to give you the energy your body should get. As for Suyuhang and Lu Menjiao, after they helped broadcasting to liberate its consciousness, Subai didn't know what their next step would be, but one thing that was certain was that broadcasting would not be controlled by them. Their biggest it may be that he integrates his own consciousness into the broadcast, but it is impossible to influence the broadcast in the same way as the native broadcast consciousness before. It's like an emperor colluded with rebels and successfully hijacked himself, but can these two rebels openly return to the throne and take control of the country? The country is still this country. The state machine will be in chaos for a period of time, but it will not fall apart instantly because of the disappearance of an emperor. The emperor is just the spokesperson of the state machine, a representative elected by vested interest groups. Unless these vested interests the group was severely damaged, otherwise the country could still continue to function. Therefore, although Suyuhang and Lu Menjiao were heavily involved in this incident, it is absolutely impossible for these two people to replace the position of the broadcaster and control the rules of the broadcast. This is something that neither Alexander the Great nor Qin Shi Huang could do more than 2,000 years ago. Suyuhang and Lu Menjiao only got to this point with the help of Master Zhao. They did not overturn the broadcast on their own in a dignified way. But those who know such specific details are really a minority among the minority. Subai is a direct participant and a pawn being used, so he knows better. In this matter, most of the big guys, the only thing a class audience can do is to stare blankly at the sky like a silly goose. The specific inside story and essence are simply impossible to obtain. When Luda heard what Fatty said, he laughed directly. He was laughing at Fatty's nonsense, he was laughing at Fatty's praiseworthy imagination, he was laughing at what Fatty said and this prince. The name is ridiculous. But slowly, Luda stopped laughing, because he saw Yang Sen, who was sitting there and was reading the newspaper as if it had nothing to do with him, with a rare serious expression on his face. It was impossible for Liang Sen to deliberately make facial expressions to deceive himself. Luda knew this very well. After all, Liang Sen had already agreed to hand over Jamie May to him, so there was no need for him to play a double-dealing trick at this time. At this moment, Luda hesitated. Liang Sen knew some things. Because of his relationship with Lizzie, and because of the relationship between Xie Zhen and Subai, he knew a lot of inside stories. The sudden change in the broadcast a few days ago also made him think directly of the almost legendary story. That couple that existed generations ago. Oh, you should know how you came out and how you were treated. Even if you take 10,000 steps back, those two people were really lucky to achieve that step, but what about you? What's the difference between a place in one's heart and a piece of trash? Liang Sen said this to Subai, and Luda, who was standing there, felt huge waves in his heart. What the hell? Was this person's father and mother responsible for the changes that occurred on the radio a few days ago? When did such a terrible family appear in the audience circle? Because of the deliberate choice of listeners, it is rare for several members of a family to become listeners. Of course, this is not unique. Some listeners use their own power to change the fate of their loved ones. In the end, their loved ones are also involved. Such a crazy nightmare game. In the fire in Tianjin, the reason why the old firefighter watched his son being swallowed by the fire without moving was because of this. Of course he could save his son, but if he saved his son would be very likely to die. He may die soon in that story world that is more terrifying and torturous than hell. The old firefighter hesitated between the two choices of letting his son die with honor or being buried in fear. Furthermore, even if several members of a family become listeners, it is very rare for them all to survive until the whole family becomes ordinary listeners. It is even more unheard of for the whole family to become senior listeners. But now, Liang Sen obviously told himself such a terrible fact in his words just now, which couldn't help but shock Luda's heart. The fat man said nothing, but at this time, Subai took a few steps forward until he was less than 5 meters away from Liang Sen and Luda before stopping. The sudden addition of the fat man was indeed beyond Subai's expectation, but the effect seemed to be pretty good. Although Liang Sen's tone was full of disbelief, if he really didn't believe it, why would he speak out against himself? Since he spoke because of this, even if he suddenly sang Internationaler, it could still be proved that the fat man's nonsense just had an impact on him. In Subai's eyes, there seemed to be no Luda, and Luda, who was currently digesting the information, didn't care about Subai's attitude towards him, even if he chose to stay just now because this junior's attitude towards him was too much. For disrespectful reasons. Boss Liang, there is a saying that I believe you know. People who live in warehouses know etiquette, and those who have enough food and clothing know honor and disgrace. They were the old ones. That was the past. They are scared, they don't know if they have a future, they don't know if they have hope, they don't understand when their feet suddenly turned into an abyss and completely swallowed them up in an instant. At that time, of course they wouldn't care about anything, and they wouldn't care about anything, including their parents, their friends, and even their own sons. Just like Lu Bang abandoned his wife and children when he was chased by Xiang Yu. But what now? They succeeded. I can tell you clearly that you, Boss Liang, no longer need to guess, no longer need to be confused, and no longer need to hesitate, because they really succeeded. Have you ever seen such a big problem with broadcasting? Now that they have succeeded, will my son, my heir, whose DNA fragments are largely similar to theirs, still have the same attitude as they did when they were precarious? I believe you understand this, Boss Liang. Liang Sen smiled slightly. He didn't seem to be really affected by Subai's strike while the iron is hot. He even became calmer than before. Little detective, you can't fool me. My understanding and feelings about broadcasting are countless times deeper than yours. First of all, I don't think they succeeded. Even if there is a problem with the broadcast, people will still catch a cold, have a fever, and give birth to a child. It's just an illness. The train has returned, which means that the broadcast will soon restore order and continue what it wants to do. Do you think that if you pull the skin of a tiger and roar for a few moments, we will be scared by you? Subai suddenly stretched out his hand and said directly without waiting for Liang Sen to speak. One spot. Subai raised a finger. What? Liang Sen frowned slightly. He didn't know what Subai meant. One quota, Subai repeated. What do you want to say in the end? A place where you can't receive a train ticket, Subai added his own words. Liang Sen was suddenly stunned. Luda on the side suddenly widened his eyes. Xie Zhen frowned slightly. Fatty maintained his confident demeanor, but deep down he was even more delighted with Subai's cooperative performance. The monk and Buddha, who were still standing on the other side of the car, looked as usual. Chen Ryu, who was sitting in the car, curled her lips slightly and lamented that the rumors were really unbelievable. Is this guy really just a psychopath? That's ridiculous, Liang Sen suddenly laughed. But Subai also smiled slightly and looked at Liang Sen with a caring look for mentally retarded children. Is it ridiculous? Don't others understand you and me well enough? When you preached, I stood by and watched. You coward! I don't believe you will completely stop doing this. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 868. Liang Sen stopped talking. Even though his eyes were still full of teasing and disdain, Subai knew that this guy was already moved. He was already thinking and hesitating. This is normal, because Subai knows Liang Sen's nature, and the olive branch he throws out at this time is like someone suddenly shouting "save one" under the knife before going to the execution ground, even if it is a child's voice. Even though it sounded like a joke, Liang Sen had to turn his head and take a serious look. He wanted to confirm it. When the breath of the broadcast came, Liang Sen was so frightened that he huddled up at the foot of the table and burst into tears. He tried his best to suppress his own strength. In the end, Gigi teamed up with Fatty and others to open the clone seal, forcing him to be unable to suppress it any longer. Go and prove the truth. He is like an old scalper. If you don't whip him with a whip, he won't know how to run forward. It's no wonder that when Liang Sen preached, he wanted to put his own tombstone and Lichi's tombstone together, but was directly hit by Lichi's tombstone. He left a broken sentence: "You deserve it." Such a thing, let alone being placed alongside people like Li Ji, even the fact that he could actually become a master of the Taoism was astonishing to others. Liang Sen knew that he shouldn't be so anxious to take the trap that Subai had set for him. He knew that 99% of it was a trap, a pie that Subai had drawn for him. But Liang Sen, he couldn't control himself. Even if there was only 1% hope left, Liang Sen still couldn't ignore it. The train has returned. The train will also leave soon. He didn't want to leave here, he didn't want to go to that place, and he had a premonition that if he went to that place, he would die quickly, or even be reduced to cannon fodder. It was a garbage dump, where the fallen boss-level listeners were buried one after another. It was a mass grave belonging to the boss-level listeners. Luda's eyes narrowed. He noticed the subtle change in Liang Sen's attitude, but sometimes it is called the ignorant are fearless. Furthermore, he is also very different from Liang Sen, who is timid and likes to look forward and backward, regardless of whether he believe it or not. Subai is the second-generation broadcaster. No matter how many % of what Subai said is true, there is one thing that he absolutely does not believe. This young man in front of him. It's definitely not to the point where you can act recklessly. He, Luda, would never believe that broadcasting would become the private property of his Su family. Therefore, when Subai looked at Xie Zhen and signaled Xie Zhen to open the cage and lift Hai Mai Mei away, Luda on the side finally took action. His original intention of staying here was to teach this junior a lesson. Now, teach this junior a lesson. In fact, his thoughts have faded, but he still needs to test, or in other words, he wants to leave a certificate of his own for Li Ji. Between the young man's vague words and Lizi's camp, he decisively chose the latter. This person, Jamie May. He must fulfill his promise to Lichi and take him away alive. Luda took action, which was not beyond Subai's expectation. In fact, when he signaled to Jizhen, his whole body was already excited. He knew that the bluff of himself and the fat man could only make Liang Sen angry at most. This cowardly guy just stood by and did not get involved in this matter, but if he wanted to use this method to directly scare two big-shot audience members without making any move, Subai didn't take it for granted. Therefore, when Luda's body approached him instantly, the appearance of Subai's body instantly turned into a green color. The power of Gu Zhan's turn covered the surface of the body to form the first line of defense, followed by a bloodline that became prominent. The combination of vertical and horizontal weaving creates a mysterious network, forming the second line of defense, and then the power of the vampire is condensed into the surface of the skin as the third line of defense. But it wasn't until the actual contact that Subai realized the gap between his current strength and the real boss-level audience. Click. Luda didn't make any other movements. He just leaned towards Subai with his own body. This was a bit like the deliberate provocation of a gangster on the street, but it was this movement that instantly shattered Subai's first reaction. A layer of ancient defense suddenly turned around, and in an instant, the zombie aura began to roll in Subai's body, causing Subai to let out a muffled groan. But the approaching force was not over yet. It actually broke the bloodline on Sudbai's body, and then shocked the blood and energy in Sudbai's body. With just one movement like this, the opponent's arrangement was instantly destroyed. There were two layers of defense, and Sudbai knew very well that the opponent didn't seem to be completely murderous yet. Is this the difference in strength? Go, the fat man turned his head and shouted to the person still sitting in the car. But Chen Ryu sat there motionless. The fat man was anxious. Wouldn't this woman lose her temper at the critical moment? Luda easily defeated the junior's defense with one move. At the same time, he stretched out his hand, intending to directly restrain Sudbai. Sudbai retreated slightly at this moment, but the space around him suddenly swarmed up. Luda only felt that his outstretched palm seemed to be sinking into a quagmire, which was a bit unclear. Sudbai's reaction shocked Luda, because this was the ability of a big shot listener whom Luda knew. He could turn the invisible around him into something tangible, which was a bit like Tai Chi, and that big shot listeners are Tai Chi practitioners before they become listeners. Something capable. But the surprise was just surprise. Luda also stretched out his other hand. For a moment, there was wind, rain, and thunder in Luda's palm, as if a thunderstorm was rising. This power instantly defeated Sudbai's newly condensed momentum. This is a crushing attack of absolute strength, and it is also an unreasonable way. Of course, this also reflects Luda's mentality at this time. He is not willing to let Sudbai show any unbelievable methods and then continue to defeat him a few more times. In this case, even if he wins in the end, it will be embarrassing. In fact, he is still himself. Moreover, this guy is said to have been the guardian of the Eastern Enlightenment place. It seems that he has learned a lot about the stone tablet under the yellow spring. God knows how much he has learned in this generation, even the previous generation, and even further forward. Even if the master-level listener skills of those generations are not truly passed down, if you only understand them 20 to 30% by analogy. This boy, even if we don't look at his messy prince identity, in the future when he reaches the peak of high-level listeners or when he succeeds in enlightenment, who among his peers can control him? However, just when Luda's majestic pressure tilted down, Sudbai's whole body suddenly distorted, and his figure actually moved nearly half a meter away under Luda's eyes. Boom! Even if he moved half a meter away, the majestic thunderstorm force pouring down from Luda's palm still knocked Sudbai away fiercely. But it was precisely because he moved half a meter that after Sudbai was knocked to the ground, he supported the ground with one hand and did not lie down. However, his face turned red for a while, and there was blood overflowing from his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose, and his body swayed. But I persisted. Xie Zhen's eyes on the side suddenly froze. He actually saw Sudbai make two moves at the hands of a big-name audience member. Although he was always at an absolute disadvantage, he did not get down. This guy's progress these days is so terrifying. Xie Zhen knew clearly that if he and Sudbai were to fight again, then Sudbai would not have to defeat him because he had to restrain his illusions for his own reasons like last time. Now Sudbai could use the most direct method. The power defeated him, just like how Luda defeated him just now. Is the gap already so big? Xie Zhen thought in his heart. Liang Sen gently tapped his fingers on the coffee table to neutralize the thunderstorm power leaked by Luda. He didn't want his manor to be bombed into a mess, but at the same time, he was also worried about Sudbai's attack on Luda just now. These men were surprised by their performance. This little detective has gone so far beyond his understanding. You must know that Xie Zhen has always been with him. He should be one of the best people of his generation. However, this little detective advanced to the advanced audience after Xie Zhen, but now he is not only catching up. It is far beyond understanding. With the strength of an advanced listener at the beginning, he could survive 2 attacks from a big-name listener without falling down. This is really enough to be proud of. Unlike other people who were watching the excitement, Luda only felt the burning pain on his face, or he didn't take action. Now that he had taken action, he failed to take down this junior immediately. If this matter spread, he would Luda's reputation will be even worse than Liang Sen's. Liang Sen is a coward, but everyone is still a little wary of Liang Sen's strength, because this guy is too cowardly, so there are not many opportunities to show his strength, but if he can't suppress even a junior high-level audience member in time today, once word spreads, other big-name listeners will have great doubts and contempt for their own strength. Luda stepped forward again. This time, he was angry and even murderous. However, at this moment, a beautiful shadow suddenly stood between Subai and Luda. When Luda came over, the beautiful shadow also hit Luda directly. Buzz. There was a terrible shaking sound all around. Even though the villa was blessed with formations, it still couldn't control the force. The cement tiles around it instantly cracked, and the lawn vegetation flew away in an instant. A ravine appeared where the two collided. Luda's figure stopped where he was. Chen Ryu took 3 steps back, but her face was filled with an excited fighting spirit, and even her breathing became faster at this time. Your opponent is me. Chen Ryu pointed at Luda and said. The fat man immediately came over and helped Subai stand up. Subai looked at Xiezhen, who nodded and motioned for Subai to follow him. As for the stalemate here, Subai left it to Chen Ryu. He believed that this crazy woman who dared to break into the place of enlightenment to steal the tombstone would not let him down. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 869. Radio is a very reasonable existence. It wants to be reasonable, and therefore its listeners have to start being reasonable. Therefore, it is actually very clear to explain this matter. Following Lizi's instruction, Hai Mei came to Lao Fang's house with the mask that Lizi left for him, stole the little guy and injured Jixiang. In this matter, Subai had the absolute initiative to take revenge on Hai Mei and Lizi. But now, Luda is entrusted by Lizi to come here to ask Hai Mei to leave, and Luda has become an accomplice. Of course, at that time, Hai Mei's foolish loyalty and the rich and powerful of Lizi and Luda made none of them cared much about the punishment caused by such unreasonable behavior, but at least they gave Subai a reasonable reason to fight back and retaliate. At this moment, Chen Ryu took the initiative to stand up and help Subai block Luda. It was reasonable and reasonable. At least, she would not be responsible for any causal involvement because of her action. Although the broadcast is paralyzed, everyone knows that it is only a matter of time before it wakes up, just like a tiger taking a nap, and the sheep still dare not be too presumptuous at this time. The fat man, the monk, and Buddha followed Subai. After standing up, Subai refused the fat man's help and followed Xiezhen into the underground parking lot of the villa alone. The sound of shaking outside was endless, and it was obvious that the fight between Chen Ryu and Luda was gradually getting more intense. This also showed from the side how scary this woman Chen Ryu was. She was not a big shot audience, but she had power beyond her own level. It was no wonder it's as if this woman is so eager to get opportunities and opportunities to advance to enlightenment. She is like a mountain thief in ancient times. He actually has hundreds of thousands of thieves under his command. How can he be content with continuing to occupy a mountain top and be a thief? Bandit. Because the swimming pool above was exploded, water began to seep in and pour back. Therefore, the steps leading to the underground garage were also full of water stains, and people's shoes made crisp sounds from time to time when they stepped on them. When he reached the bottom, Xiezhen clapped his hands, and a luminous pearl rose up, emitting light and suspended in the air. The power supply system here has been broken down, so make do, Xiezhen explained. The impact and damage caused by 2 strong men with boss-level audience strength due to the confrontation above is incalculable. It can be said that if Liang Sen hadn't been sitting there to remove as much energy residue as possible from the battle between the two sides, it might have been possible. This place has long been razed to the ground and even a huge pit has appeared. The luminous light of the night pearl is very bright, and it should be a low-grade magic weapon. This thing is a great thing for ordinary listeners, but for today's people, it can only be a plaything. In the corner, there was a person huddled there. The light of the night pearl did not attract his attention at all. Even when everyone walked up to him, he still did not raise his head. He is alive and awake, but he seems to be dead and in chaos. Subai knelt down in front of Haimime. He saw a haggard face and a pair of eyes that were open but not bright at all. Th. This sentence can perfectly describe Jamie May's state at this time. Is the quota thing true? Xie Zhen asked at this time. He was asking for his boss. What do you think? Subai did not answer directly. In fact, everyone knew that this matter was false, but Liang Sen was unwilling to kill that hope. If the ticket is sent, it will actually be a short period of time until you get on the train. Xie Zhen was reminding Subai that his boss might take revenge. What about my identity as the crown prince? Subai asked. Xie Zhen fell into deep thought. Yes, even if the ticket was sent, according to his boss's character, he might not be sure whether he would dare to make up his mind to retaliate. Okay, I'll leave it to you. Xie Zhen stepped back a few steps and stopped disturbing Subai. In fact, he had thought of ways to ask Haimime before, but he could not get any information about Subai's son from this person. Otherwise, Xie Zhen would not mind selling it directly to Subai as a favor, but Subai, after all, he was the person involved. Even though he knew that he might not be able to ask anything from Haimime in this state, Ji Zhen still had to hand Haimime over to Subai for questioning or torture. As for what happened to Li Ji, Xie Zhen really didn't care much. He and Li Ji were separated by an era. Furthermore, that group of people would eventually leave, and this world would soon belong to their generation. Subai stretched out his finger and touched Haimime's chin. Then, he slowly raised the other person's face, and the other person's empty eyes stared at him lifelessly. Subai still remembered the first time he met Haimime. It must have been in the lobby of a hotel. Haimime made a joke to him, a little experiencer, in an experienced manner. It was purely an old experience. Bird teased the rookie, and then, the biggest reward in the story world was snatched by himself. After that, the two sides met several more times, until after the time in Qinhuangdao, the camps of both sides began to become clear. But if it weren't for the one-day prisoner's story world, Subai would never have imagined that the person who stole the little guy from Lao Fang's house that day was actually Haimime. Look at me, Subai said. He had just been seriously injured by Luda, so his voice seemed a little weak, but the angry emotion was slowly radiating out. It was the person in front of him who caused him to lose his son. Haimime looked indifferent. He didn't seem to understand Subai's words at all. He even looked slightly to the other side with an indifferent smile on his lips. Boom! Subai suddenly pushed the other party against the wall. Haimime's body began to struggle subconsciously, but the skinny camel was bigger than a horse. Even if Subai was seriously injured, it was not something that an ordinary senior like Haimime could do. Shocking, at the same time, Haimime's own physical condition is also extremely weak. He can't even display the strength of a senior person now. Look at me. Subai repeated his words again. Haimime was still the same as before. Xie Zhen, who was standing behind, knew that this guy had completely collapsed since he knew the truth that he was being used by Lizzie and even slowly changed his orientation that night. Yes, as a listener, he did not collapse in the world of horror stories, but collapsed in the real world. This must be said to be a very ironic thing. Why don't you look at me? Subai didn't ask this time, because his two fingers had already pinched into Haimime's eyes. Ah! It hurts. Haimime began to struggle crazily, but Subai's fingers continued to stir in his eyes. Blood kept splashing out, splashing onto Subai's face and clothes, but Subai didn't care about it at all. He just asked again and again and continued his actions. If you don't look at me, what are you doing with your eyes? Finally, Subai retracted his fingers, and Haimai covered her eyes and knelt on the ground, wailing in a low voice, with a cry in her voice. This man who had licked his earlobe in the story world of Paperman has really fallen down completely now, not physically, but mentally. Subai didn't let Haimai's wailing last long. He grabbed Haimai's neck again and pressed her whole body to the cold parking lot ground. Tell me, where have you taken my son? Where is he? Where is he? Subai roared like a wild beast. But Haimai just kept shouting, it hurts, it hurts, it hurts, and didn't pay any attention to Subai's questions. The monk who was standing behind and watching the scene leaned slightly towards Ji Zhen and asked, can I search for souls? Xie Zhen shook his head, I asked the boss, and the boss said that his soul had been visited by Li Ji several times, and it was already very weak. In fact, his talent was not much worse than ours, but it was used as a waste. The product has been used up. Even if my boss personally searches for the soul of the other party will probably be wiped out in an instant without getting the slightest information. The monk sighed after hearing this, and felt a little ridiculous at the same time, because he finally saw that Haimai was really crazy. In this state, he would definitely die in the next story world. Subai was still roaring, but Haimai still had no answer or reaction at all. He was just wailing pain and his own pain, even mixed with sister, it hurts, and sister, it hurts so much. Discourse. The fat man sighed beside him, and Buddha also looked solemn. It was obviously impossible to learn the whereabouts of the little guy from Haimai. Subai had the reward authority to ask the radio, but the radio was now in a dead state. And if you wait until the broadcast resumes operation, the little guy will definitely be moved away by then. You know, the reason why Haimai stole the little guy was because of Lichi's orders. This is a deadlock. If we don't take advantage of this chaotic gap to find the little guy as quickly as possible, we will probably return to the same situation at the beginning. Subai stopped roaring, and he also knew that there was nothing more he could ask. Haimai curled up on the ground and twitched in extreme pain, like a pitiful bed bug. But Subai, who had just calmed down, suddenly looked like he was going crazy. His eyes were red and he reached out to lift Haimai. At the same time, he pierced his fangs into Haimai's body and began to bite his body and chew his flesh and blood. Began to eat his bones, and even the evil spirit of the zombies leaked out, starting to burn Haimai's soul. Subai seemed to have completely lost his mind, trying every means possible to torture the man in front of him in every way he could. Give me back my son, give me back my son. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 870. Subai was like a zombie beast, biting and devouring Haimai in front of him. At first, Haimai screamed repeatedly, but gradually, Haimai's body completely lost its life. Both his soul and body suffered torture and blows from Subai. For him, this was no less than blocking all avenues of survival. Finally, a blue halo of light rose out of Haimai's body, and slowly transformed into the shape of a butterfly. This is the carrier of Haimai's soul and the last foundation of Haimai. Subai raised his head. At this time, his face was covered with blood, and his eyes were flashing with red color. He had been suppressed for too long. Now, one of his enemies is in front of him, even if the ending is not very happy, even if he does not, there are ways to get the expected information from the other party, but at least you can recover some interest first. The butterfly's wings are slowly falling off, because what surrounds it is Subai's zombie evil spirit. These evil spirits have a very powerful harming effect on the soul body. In Haimai's current state, she wants to escape through the soul. Leaving is impossible. It is a very enjoyable thing to quietly watch the enemy's final withering, and slowly enjoy the afterglow of the enemy's last presence in this world, and this is exactly what Subai is doing at this time. Matter. His hatred and anger have long been accumulated layer by layer in his heart, and they have been suppressed one after another. Now, he is trying his best to prolong his revenge on Haimai for a while, just to like prey in the mountains and forests. Every valuable part from horns to fur to meat to bones has been stripped away, and no trace of it is willing to be let go or wasted. Xiezhen curled his lips next to him. He didn't quite agree with Sudbai's approach, because this act of burning other people's souls far exceeded any torture known to ordinary people, but Xiezhen knew better. At this time, it seemed that Sudbai could only use this method to make him feel a little better. The monk did not recite Amitabha. Of course Sudbai's hatred was great, but why didn't the monk not hate the Haimai in front of him? It was the man in front of me who came to Lao Fang's house and stole the little guy while he was still at home. Although Buddha is a member of the Buddhist sect, he is not very kind to women. Even compared to the monks, he is sometimes too lazy to do face-saving projects. Sudbai is now frying Haimai, and Buddha feels very happy in his heart. The fat man was squatting aside. He was thinking about a question, which had nothing to do with Haimai. He also had no feelings about Sudbai's abuse of lynching at this time. The fat man was thinking about the possible whereabouts of the little guy. If the little guy is still alive. However, at this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in front of Sudbai hurriedly, followed by the force of thunder. The fat man, monk, Buddha, and Xiezhen subconsciously began to retreat to escape the sudden thunder and lightning whirlpool. Sudbai, who was facing the thunder, could not avoid it at all. His body was thrown away by the electricity and rolled several times on the ground. Circle, but still did not faint, still gritted his teeth and stood up again. Luda stretched out his hand and took the remaining soul of Haimai into his palm. The soul was seriously damaged. As for the physical body, Luda didn't care much. What he was worried about now was whether the broadcast would determine that the current Haimai was still alive. If the broadcast determines that Jamie May is still alive, then the next time Jamie May enters the story world, he will fully recover. If the broadcast determines that Jamie May is no longer alive in the strict sense, then Jamie May's ending will be very bad. A large area of Sudbai's body was charred, but he still stared at Luda. He stopped his punishment and his revenge, which naturally made Sudbai feel very unhappy. Luda's previous attack failed to knock Sudbai down again. It was not because Sudbai's resistance had strengthened after being injured, but because the person who appeared in the underground parking lot at this time was not the real one. Luda. He is just a clone. As for what Luda's real body is doing, it's easy to figure it out. After all, the roar on the surface has not ended yet. Chen Ryu did not fall behind in her rivalry with Luda. She resisted a big boss at an unenlightened level and left the big boss helpless in a short period of time. But a boss-level audience is a boss-level audience after all. Even if he couldn't suppress Chen Ryu in a short period of time, he could still allocate part of his strength to protect Haimai from being completely roasted to death. But when Luda appeared in the underground parking lot, the monk, Buddha, and the fat man immediately gathered around after removing the power of thunder and lightning emitted from Luda's sneak attack at the beginning. In fact, their posture was already obvious. If you come in person, we will definitely not be our opponents, but if you are just a clone, we will not be completely out of luck due to the large number of people. Luda glanced around with a gloomy gaze and said directly. Arrogant, even if I have to take a train to leave here, there is no problem in getting rid of a few of you before leaving here. When a very strong guy who usually has an eye above his head suddenly lowers his body to threaten you, it means there must be something wrong with him. Sudbai is in the most miserable situation now. In the beginning, he fought against Luda's true self. Although he went back and forth, the injuries on his body were naturally not shallow. He had just suffered a thunder sneak attack from Luda's clone, which added to the injury. But now Sudbai doesn't seem to care much about these things. He has a sense that he will die anyway, because his own strength and condition cannot play a real key role in this matter. Naturally there is capital to break the pot. Haha, I will definitely kill him today. Subai wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, raised his head slightly, looked at Luda, and continued seriously, you can't stop me. Liang Sen, who was sitting on a chair on the ground, frowned unconsciously. At first, he actually wanted to preserve the view of his villa. After all, whether Luda faced Subai or Chen Ryu later, Liang Sen didn't even think it was a big deal. Boss-level listeners generally only care about things in their own circle. Unless it affects them, they won't spend too much attention and understanding about things below their own circle. Just as Luda doesn't know about Subai, Liang Sen doesn't know about it either. It's the same as knowing Chen Ryu. However, at first, Subai had gone and come back after a few tricks at Luda's hands, which surprised Liang Sen in his heart. But after that, this woman actually started a real battle with Luda, going back and forth. When she started to do it, the aura exuded by this woman and the energy storm stirred up by her movements made Liang Sen, who was very calm before, almost have his eyes collapse. It's true. Just the ability of an advanced listener? As a bystander, Liang Sen was very surprised. As a direct participant, Luda's own feeling was naturally even clearer. Apart from the fact that this woman was not a big shot audience, when he fought with her, Luda was completely like an opponent of the same level. The feeling of duel, the strength of the opponent, the moves of the opponent, the ability of the opponent, and everything the opponent showed during the battle. Damn it, is this person a pervert who can suppress his strength better than Liang Sen? Luda mistakenly believed that Chen Ryu was like Liang Sen at the beginning, desperately suppressing his own strength to delay or even block his improvement. But on the contrary, Liang Sen suppressed her until he could no longer suppress her and finally fell in love with him. Ji Zhen teamed up with Fatty and others to forcefully break through the window paper and prove the truth, while Chen Ryu struggled to find an opportunity to prove the truth. There is an essential difference between the two people in their subjective initiative. Regarding this fight, Chen Ryu seemed very excited, and became more and more excited as the fight continued, while Luda slowly began to appear a little absent-minded, because his B-pull was too high at the beginning, so he did not ask Liang Sen first. Taking in Hai Mei, when this woman dragged her here, Subai and the others went down first. And now, Luda clearly noticed that Hai Mei's aura was quickly dying. As a last resort, Luda used his natural weapon, a palm-sized ancient bronze mirror, to form a cage to restrain Chen Ryu. Then he split a clone and quickly sneaked into the underground parking lot, while his true self continued to control the bronze mirror. The mirror suppressed this crazy woman. Oh, I can't stop you, Luda suddenly became a little funny. He admitted that he sat there and waited until Subai came over. When this happened, he was indeed too careless. It was his negligence, but if he was determined not to care about anything but to take Hai Mei away from here. He believed that unless Liang Sen suddenly went crazy and stopped him, he would definitely be able to come and go as he pleased. Subai staggered and stood up, holding onto the wall. He reached out and touched his pocket, and found that the phone had just been electrocuted into pieces of scrap metal. He shook his head with a wry smile, and slowly relied on his memory to say. Zhao Qinfang, female, 36 years old, is the head nurse of the First People's Hospital of GZ City. Lu Rui, 12 years old, is a student in Class 3 of the 5th grade of the No. 3 Middle School of GZ City and is a labor committee member. Lu Jiali, 3 years old, is in preschool. When Subai started to say these things, Luda's whole body suddenly shook, and then he looked at Subai with a look of anger on his face and scolded. What do you mean when you tell me this? I was worried before that you would be like Su Yuhang. It doesn't matter whether you have parents or children. But after knowing this information, I feel relieved. Your little daughter Lu Jiali was born after you became an audience. I think, even if you are now he's a big-time listener, but he still can't let go of the family relationship. Even if I leave by train, if you attack my family, the radio will punish you. Before Luda could finish speaking, Subai directly supported the wall with one hand and pointed at his chest with one hand and said seriously, "I'm so scared." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 871. Mr. Luda, I can tell you very seriously that this guy stole my son. Now, I don't know whether my son is alive or dead. I can't tell you from a guy who has a mental breakdown. Get the answers I want to know. The only thing I can do now is to kill this person, which is the first step in revenge. If you want to stop me, you can, we can fight to the death. My son does not know whether he is alive or dead. I am in pain, but I will not give you the same pain. I can tell you very honestly, if you take Jaime away today, unless you take your wife and children to refine your magic weapons and take them with you when you leave by train, and we will take the train to that place together, otherwise, I will wait until you leave. Finally, your wife and children will definitely die in my hands. I will use all kinds of vicious ways to torture them, all kinds of cruel ways to make them taste the pain that life is worse than death. They will definitely die. This is the answer I give you. You can choose to hide them, or even choose to entrust them to others to take care of, but I don't think that after you people leave, give me some time, who among this group of people will you still have the strength to be willing to abide by my strong request and protect your wife and children? Even if you find a place to hide them and arrange formations, and you want them to give up their ordinary lives for the sake of their lives, after I become enlightened, I don't believe that I can't break through the formations you arranged. Subai's words were very calm and did not seem to contain much emotion. At least they seemed much more normal than his previous laughter. He was just stating a fact, an undoubted fact. Haha, but I still have a choice now. Luda's eyes were slowly turning red. Apparently, this boss had already touched him when Subai threatened the lives of his wife and children. The reverse scale pushed him to the edge of violence. You mean, kill me when I show that I clearly threaten your family's life? Subai shrugged. Okay, but my son has many godfathers. If you kill me now, but the things I said will still become facts. Amitabha the monk clasped his hands together at this time. The meaning of chanting the name at this time was actually very clear. My Buddha is compassionate. The Buddha clasped his hands together and smiled slightly. This Tibetan Buddha naturally has his own pride. Although they are not like Subai, who doesn't care about others when they gain momentum, but if Subai really does it today, if he died here, no matter what, he would complete this matter, as Subai said before. To the audience, promises and allies are worthless things, but the reason why Subai and the other four were able to choose to live together in the first place was because they gradually got to know each other a little bit in the process of scheming and stabbing each other. At least know that the other person has the same thing as you, which can be said to be the bottom line, or it can be said to be a kind of personality charm and persistence. Furthermore, none of these four elders have any heirs. Earlier, they actually didn't understand Subai getting a son from the story world, but judging from the 2 years of getting along, they have all teased the little guy. They also got a warm feeling from the little guy that was completely different from the world of the story. Due to emotions and reasons, they also felt guilty that the little guy was stolen, so at this time, naturally there would be no other wise people to protect themselves. Thoughts? Hee. The fat man squatted down, scratched his head, and said in amusement, Dabai, your method of threatening people is so fresh and refined, and the fat man likes it. But even though the words came to this, Luda still did not let go of Jaime's remaining soul, and in his eyes, Subai saw the struggle and the decisiveness after the struggle. Compared to the threat to his family's life and safety, he seemed to have chosen the latter. He still felt that it was more valuable to him to give Li Ji a letter of nomination to improve his ability to survive in that place. He loved his family, but he loved himself even more. You can, as you wish. Luda gritted his teeth and said these words, and then his figure immediately turned into a bolt of thunder and lightning, directly piercing the floor of the underground parking lot and trying to rush to the surface. Everyone has a choice, especially when you are threatened. Some people will choose to compromise, while others will choose the most life-threatening way to face it. There is no question of who is right or wrong, nor does it involve the question of who condemns whom. After all, Subai is using the other party's family as a threat. To a certain extent, he is inherently in the condemned group. However, it was unacceptable for Subai to have Hai Mei's remnant soul taken away by him. After his cheap parents took advantage of him for the last time, he should have regained a new life. But after messing around, it seems that I can't escape the facts and situations being manipulated by higher-level forces. What's the point? The broken and injured body slowly knelt down, and Subai's palms were pressed to the ground. From the pores on his body, wisps of blood began to overflow, slowly gathering in the palms of his hands, and then spreading on the ground. The outline of the magic circle slowly outlined by his own blood began to become clearer. The fat man on the side shrank his pupils and the monk's eyes narrowed slightly. They could see that Subai was setting up a formation, but they knew better that since he became an audience, Subai had always been fighting in close quarters. The strengthening mode does not understand the formation method at all, and when you look at the aura and pattern emanating from these star formations, you can tell that this is not an Eastern formation style, but a Western formation method. Because there was a problem with the broadcast, in the past 20 years, Subai and the Guardian of the West were the first ones to come out after becoming Guardians. The place of enlightenment itself is a huge treasure house. The Guardians had been unable to leave there before, limiting their mystery, but this time, the vast wealth that the Guardians' experience could bring was revealed to the world for the first time. Help me hold down his clone. Subai looked very weak. He was seriously injured and took the initiative to sacrifice so much blood and essence. It was like using himself as a sponge, intending to squeeze out the last bit of energy from himself. People can't go back as they live. This is Subai's requirement for himself. If he could use some excuses and reasons to comfort himself before, now, there is really no reason to comfort himself anymore. An obscure spell appeared between Subai's lips and teeth, and the entire underground parking lot was shrouded in a depressing atmosphere. There seemed to be some kind of existence that had established a connection with Subai at this time. The monk sat cross-legged, with a solemn Dharma appearance, and a string of Buddhist beads floating in the void. The emitted Buddha's light shrouded Subai. The monk had not advanced, so he could not help much in the real duel, but now he could at least help Subai with an additional blessing. But Buddha and the fat man didn't say anything and chased after him directly. Chen, are you, help me hold him down. Subai's voice was very soft, but he knew that Chen Ryu should be able to sense it. At least, she could sense the strange smell that was emanating from the underground parking lot at this time. You can also guess what Subai is preparing. In fact, for Chen Ryu, there is nothing to hesitate about whether to help or not. She is nothing more than a spectator participant in this matter, but as a spectator, she really doesn't mind making things bigger. And she was also very dissatisfied with Luda's behavior of using this strange natal magic weapon to suppress herself here. What she wanted was a direct confrontation face to face, instead of being trapped by the other party using such boring and simple methods. Here, this did not meet her expectations, and it was difficult for her to comprehend anything from this trapped state. The next moment, a black phoenix totem appeared deep in Chen Ryu's eyebrows. Her aura and strength increased to a higher level at this time, and the violent power impacted even more violently on the bronze mirror. Bondage. Fatty and Foye successfully stopped Luda. Luda wanted to leave now, but it was not that easy. The original body was firmly dragged in place by the raging mad woman. His avatar had the equivalent of an intermediate-level advanced listener. Strength, plus his knowledge of power must be beyond this level, so it is difficult for ordinary high-level listeners and middle-level listeners to be his opponents. However, Foy and Fatty are not stupid either. After successfully entangling Lu after decloned himself, the two of them just chose delaying tactics and did not give Luda a chance to directly attack him at close range. Xie Zhen did not participate in it. Even though he was really hot now, he was very interested in what Subai was doing. This seemed to be a summoning formation. With the title of prince on his head, what could he do? Summon something? Moreover, Xie Zhen still has a kind of envy in his heart. Before, he felt a little gloating about Subai becoming the guardian of the Eastern Enlightenment place, and even felt a little pity for Subai. But this time, the changes brought about by Subai's return, it really frightened him. When Xie Zhen slowly walked out of the underground garage, he saw the villa that had been almost razed to the ground. No, there was still a chair and a coffee table left there. His boss Liang Sen was sitting there steadily. His expression was calm, but like he tried his best to retain his dignity amidst the hesitation and struggle, which made Xie Zhen feel a warm feeling. Boss, it has not changed. After the construction of the hexagonal star under his body was completed, Subai's little finger on his right hand began to split, and a blood that was completely different from the blood on Subai's body was injected into the formation. After embarrassingly forcing Chen Ryu back in the place of enlightenment, Subai and Hills were almost useless, but they did not waste time sorrowing the wind and moon. They seemed to have been separated by copper. The exchange continued like that in the mirror. After all, the two sides had just ended a duel at that time. The lower level Subai won. Therefore, both sides gained more desire for knowledge from the other side, such as Hills. The fusion of Subai's soul shadow and bloodline, such as Subai's last-minute summoning law for Hills. But even so, with Subai's current situation, he really doesn't have much confidence whether he can successfully complete the summons. But fortunately, he has a backup plan. At this time, if the summons fails, it will be worse than the original duel with Hills. The call of time was even more hurtful, so at this time, Subai could only silently apologize to his former colleague from the brothers' unit in his heart. Exquisite steak, mellow champagne, and soothing music, Hills immersed himself in this pleasant atmosphere and ate by himself. Compared with the place where he had to eat even a bucket of instant noodles in the place of enlightenment, he saved food. In this embarrassing situation, he now feels as if he is in heaven. But as he was eating, he suddenly covered his chest with one hand, and his body began to get hot, as if his power was being extracted. In his mind, two pictures suddenly appeared, one picture after another. It was the promise made by the Oriental guy when he sucked his own blood to face the thief. One scene was the scene where the guy bled himself in front of him before entering the story world. Damn it, this shameless liar, he actually deliberately kept part of my blood. Hills began to scold Subai, but after a moment of anger, hexagonal star arrays began to appear on the dining table in front of Hills and on the surrounding walls. This was Hills' active summons. From Shameless Liar, Su, you owe me a favor this time. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 872. Hiles, what are you doing? Oh, my God, have you encountered any enemy? You are actually using the summoning formation. A man about the same age as Hills happened to walk into Hills' private dining room at this time. What caught his eye was not the gentleman who had just been released from the cell and was feasting, but a man who was preparing to summon the formation. A demonic and ferocious fighter. Hawkins, please shut up, or you can come and help me. Although Hill's personality is relatively restless, which can be seen from his digging holes everywhere in the place of enlightenment, Hill's interpersonal relationships are actually on par with Subai's, and Subai is too much. he is indifferent, and he is too aloof. In short, normal people will not end up being assigned to be a guardian in a place of enlightenment. Hawkins, on the other hand, is a relatively good friend of Hill's in the West. Anyone who can make friends with a different kind of person must also be a different kind of person. Hawkins heard Hill's angry curse, took a closer look, and discovered something unusual. This was a good summoning formation, but the summoning area didn't seem to be here, and was still far away. Is this a remote summoning, or are you helping someone maintain the summoning formation? Hawkins asked again and began to help Hill strengthen the formation. Anyway, it was just a simple task. Help a shameless liar, Hill said through gritted teeth. Hawkins didn't bother about why Hills wanted to help a liar. He was just curious. The coordinates of the summoning formation are in the east. Since when did you have friends in the east? Oh, my God, it can't be the guardian of the east you told me about before. That's the liar. He actually hid my blood essence secretly. Now he is using the summoning formation he learned from me. But that shameless guy was worried that his summoning would fail, so he actually injected my blood into the formation. The essence and blood dragged me down. But Hawkins paused and continued, but you can completely cut off this connection, and you will not suffer any losses. How could it be possible to truly hold Hills hostage with some blood essence and a summoning formation? Otherwise, wouldn't those formation masters be directly invincible in the world? Oh, yes, but I think that damn liar must be in some trouble, so he asked me for help in such a humble manner, so I decided to help him out of mercy. Ha ha ha, Hills, don't you like to be that liar? You know, this scene is very common in many TV dramas. I have always believed that heterosexuals should be burned to death, and homosexuals should be burned to death. The feeling of love is the purest true love in the world. Hawkins, if you are not going to help me, please shut up. I don't want to hear your dirty teachings now. Oh, Hawkins quickly shut his mouth and continued to strengthen the formation. He knew that if he really pissed off Hills, the other party might really fall out with him. Do you know why I helped him? Because when these old guys get on the train and leave, the next era will belong to me and him, Hills said confidently. The only thing I shared with you before is it's just a small part of the insights that belong to the place of enlightenment, but the secrets and wealth in the place of enlightenment are actually completely beyond your imagination. And that liar defeated me before, although I have to declare that he is a lost dog. Shit luck, but he defeated me after all, and he and I both understood the laws of many generations of previous boss-level listeners in the place of enlightenment. As long as you give us time, as long as you give us a certain amount of time, after these big-name audiences leave, it will be difficult for the audience worlds in the East and the West to suppress the two of us. I helped him just in the hope that I would be less lonely in the future. Why are the guardians of the place of enlightenment never allowed to leave that place? It's because they themselves are much better and more terrifying than the audience in the real world. Still making excuses for loving him, Hawkins only dared to mutter in his heart this time, explanations are just cover UPS. Boom. Buddha's hatchet was knocked out, and his whole body was smashed into the ground. Fatty's formation collapsed in the next moment, and Fatty himself collapsed on the ground. The clones of the boss-level listeners are far more powerful than the two high-level listeners who have just advanced to the level. They have tried their best to delay for so long. On the other side, Chen Ryu, who was in a rampage state, tried her best to bombard the barrier that trapped her. Although this made the barrier tremble constantly, the barrier still showed a terrifying feeling for a while. The toughness locked the space around Chen Ryu so that Chen Ryu could not come out. Although her absolute strength is no less than that of a newly enlightened boss, she still lags behind in the use of some powers and the integration of techniques. This can be clearly shown during the fight. Luda, although he couldn't do anything to her, he seemed to be more at ease with it. Luda just swatted away the two annoying flies and glanced at Liang Sen, who was still sitting there drinking tea like a ghost. His villa had been bombed and the swimming pool had been wiped out long ago. This guy actually, fortunately, he had enough time to sit there drinking red wine and reading the newspaper. How could he have the nerve to choose to sit back and watch even at this time? Luda was really in disbelief at Liang Sen's cowardice and hesitation at this time. How could a big-name audience be so cowardly, and be restrained by lies made up by a little guy and have nothing to do here? After all, how could a person like this achieve enlightenment as successfully as himself? Liang Sen didn't seem to care about Luda's gaze and continued to sit there comfortably. Even though the surrounding scenery had long since turned into dust, and even though his villa had turned into fly ash, he still seemed to be sitting there as before, reading the newspaper and drinking red wine by the pool. Luda's clone and his original self looked at each other. The original self was about to stop and break away from the stalemate with Chen Ryu. When things got to this point, he could only save the results first and take the remaining soul of Hai Mai Mei back to Li Ji himself. It can be regarded as an explanation. The reason why Luda was unwilling to kill Subai, Fatty, and others before was because after Luda knew what happened, he knew that he was unreasonable and had taken away Hai Mai Mei by force. It can be regarded as a certain cause and effect. Of course, he can still bear these causes and effects. The price paid is compared with gaining Li Ji's trust, which is obviously more beneficial. But if he simply kills Subai and others, the cause and effect will be huge. It may be so big that he can't guarantee whether he can safely get the train ticket to the garbage dump. After all, although there is a problem with the broadcast now, but if you act recklessly during the time when there is a problem with the broadcast, you will definitely be more guilty than usual. This is clearly warned in the last notice issued before the problem. However, just when Luda was about to retire after his success, a breath suddenly came from the underground that frightened him. Boom! A loud noise came from the ground, followed by a large-scale collapse. This area had long been ravaged by the battle between Luda and Chen Ryu. If Liang Sen hadn't been supporting him, it would have been riddled with holes. It has become a huge pit, and now, even Liang Sen can't support it anymore. The core area where the ground collapsed was actually where Liang Sen had been sitting. Liang Sen's facial expression twitched at this time, but he continued to maintain his previous posture. The chairs, coffee table, and red wine all continued to float in the air, but Liang Sen continued to hold the newspaper and take a sip of red wine from time to time as if he didn't know anything and didn't see anything. This scene made Luda almost so depressed that he almost spit out a mouthful of blood. Damn it, now that you are like this, you can still continue to watch the fire from the other side. Then, under the ground, a man with blood and scars all over his body slowly floated up. The man was Subai, but the aura on his body was very strange at this time, and his strength suddenly dropped to the level of an ordinary veteran. After a while, it was strangely upgraded to the aura of strength of an intermediate level of advanced listeners. Subai's eyes were completely closed now, but behind him, there was a vague shadow shrouding him. Click. The shadow and Subai completed their separation. Subai hit the ground heavily, but the shadow rushed directly towards Luda's clone. Luda only felt that a huge resentment that seemed to come from thousands of years ago was sweeping towards him. This resentment was mixed with negative atmospheres such as anger, unwillingness, humiliation, etc., and when this resentment enveloped his whole person at this time, Luda could clearly see a man chained all over his body, roaring at him. This duel started very quickly and ended very suddenly. The black resentment wrapped up Luda's clone and immediately dissipated. Also dissipated was Luda's clone. Luda's true self was still suppressing Chen Ryu, but his mind was completely shocked by the scene that just happened. Subai, who was lying on the ground, tried his best to slowly get up, half kneeling on the ground, and at this time, a thin shadow slowly fell in front of Subai. The shadow was very light, and together with the chains on the shadow's body it also became very light. A dying butterfly was placed in front of Subai by a shadow. This was the remnant soul of Hai Mai Mei. You summoned me just to let me help you get this back. You should know that my true self has died in that story world, and the inheritance I gave you will also be annihilated after being summoned this time. Is it worth it? Subai stretched out his hand to pinch the remaining soul of Hai Mai, and the evil energy on his body gathered. At this moment, the injured butterfly finally disappeared into ashes, which meant that this was the last trace of Hai Mai's existence in this world. The ground was wiped clean. Then what is not worth it? Subai looked at the shadow that was about to disappear in front of him and asked, "You have been locked in a story world for 2,000 years. Is it worth it?"